We have a lot of news to get to, and you have some new reporting this morning.
Well, I've been speaking to the White House, people involved in the negotiating overnight, and right now they are optimistic. They believe Israel's going to be voting, obviously going to be voting. That's going to give them, after the vote, 24 hours to redeploy. And it is the hope of the White House, it is the hope of the negotiators that the hostages will be freed by Monday. But more than that, David Ignatius, there is hope. And they believe, with all the parties that have been assembled here, that if the Abraham Accords was step one, this is step two. But they believe that this opens the door, considering everybody that's involved into this, to a much bigger peace plan that encompasses the entire region in the months and years to come. Again, we shall see. The Middle East always, as you know, tricky and frustrating. But the key here is they have a timeline and said they expect Israel to redeploy within 24 hours after they vote at the Knesset this afternoon. And the White House expects the hostages to be freed by Monday at the latest.
So, Joe, President Trump made a decision and was able to impose it really on all the parties that it was time for this war to end. They do have momentum for this first phase of the ceasefire and hostage release. There's no question in my mind that that's going to go forward as planned. The next phase is going to be difficult because Hamas essentially has to agree to surrender, has to agree to give up its weapons. Hamas fighters who give their weapons will get amnesty, allowing a kind of calm to return to Gaza. But the final terms, where Israel will withdraw to, exactly who will run Gaza, whether Hamas can be held to President Trump's demand that they play no role whatsoever in the future governance of Gaza is still remains to be seen. But your basic point that the deal that President Trump is announcing played a key part in negotiating is a significant change. This war was blocked for 2 years. President Biden, who preceded him, was unable to find a way to stop it. President Trump found that way by being tough on both sides. And he'll take a victory lap for sure over the next few days, but it's deserved. There's no way that I can see that this would have been done without Trump's pressure in the final hours.
Well, by the way, the White House will be the first to admit that it's, and the negotiators, that it's some of these business relationships that have drawn criticism in the past that actually have allowed them to go in and go places that let's just say a more conventional White House and team would have been able to go. Their biggest, it's so interesting, their concern is, but it's not so much of a concern anymore. Almost like they feel like their responsibility is keeping Israel in line, keeping Netanyahu in line, making sure he follows through with this. It's interesting. The Middle Eastern leaders, the Arab leaders that I've spoken with, no friends of Hamas. Very skeptical, actually, that in the end, Hamas will lay down all their arms, that they are going to do whatever they can to live to fight another day. But at least in the short term, it will be interesting to see if this timeline is followed through.
Yeah, all the normal caveats when it comes to the Middle East. Things are fragile, things could change. But if indeed this deal does follow through as planned, I think the beginning of the end of this war will likely be traced to that Israeli strike in Doha. That was the moment where the United States said enough is enough. These are the Qataris there are helping, they're mediating, there are allies in the region. We saw Trump's anger at that strike so much that he signed almost an Article 5-like security guarantee with Qatar, saying this cannot happen again. He made Netanyahu apologize to the leaders there.
And by the way, it's very interesting. You know, Donald Trump does not often do things that cross his base. There were a lot of people in the America First base angry. Many reached out to me, angry that he signed that security guarantee for Qatar. But what a message that sent to Netanyahu. Basically, enough is enough.
Yeah, and a photograph of Netanyahu on the phone in the Oval Office calling the Qataris put out on the White House's social media accounts. They wanted to underscore, hey, this can't happen again. You're right that Trump's connections to the region, Witkoff, Kushner, there's a lot of people involved in this peace agreement who have deep ties to the Gulf states there. And the president has put on some real public pressure. He is finally putting his chip in the game here and saying even he's going to travel to Israel, saying, look, if this gets done, and as the timeline you laid out is what I have heard as well, these next 24 to 72 hours, the ideal is for the president to head to Israel himself, speak to the Knesset this weekend to sort of say this, to sort of take that the final stamp of this deal, at least this first phase, to get those hostages home will be concluded. We'll see what the future holds. But that in itself, as we think about the tens of thousands of people who have died, and of course the ongoing suffering there by the Israelis whose loved ones have been held hostage, that in itself a momentous day.
Yeah, no doubt about it. John Meacham, let's talk history here. My God, the failure since 1948 to figure out a way to resolve this issue are so plentiful. I can only think of a few offhand successful negotiations. One, of course, that Mika and her family know very well about it, the Camp David Accords, but also the Abraham Accords, which actually Jared Kushner went around the Middle East and, of course, for Donald Trump. Built relationships across the Middle East. Many of those he continued in the private sector, gaining criticism, of course, for making money that he did for his business. But those relationships built up, and those are the same relationships that he's using right now, along with Steve Witkoff and others, to bring us to a place where I don't think we've been.
No, I think that's right.
I guess I should ask you, how historic is this?
Well, as ever, depends on how the chapter ends, but the beginning of the chapter is remarkable. And one of the things about honesty and citizenship and a sense of, I would say, maturity about what people in a democracy should do is, even if someone with whom you disagree about 99 things does the 100 really well, you should say so, because that's what intellectual honesty is. And so all credit to President Trump and his, as you say, unconventional team. But if it takes an unconventional team, that's fine, right? I remember once asking the senior President Bush after something terrible had happened. It's a sign of something that I can't remember what it was after he'd been president. Something had happened in the Middle East. And I said, this is a man who spent decades dealing with this. I said, Mr. President, do you think this ever gets resolved? And he said, God, I don't know. That's what one of the most experienced diplomatic presidents in American history thought, is that it was an unknowable thing. There are two streams that intersect, I think, broadly put, in the American relationship with the region. There is the one you allude to, the 1948 recognition by President Truman. There was also the post-Yalta meeting aboard a warship in Alexandria Harbor between Franklin Roosevelt and the King of Saudi Arabia. And it was an early moment that reflected what the complexity of our interests would be in the region. And it's an incredibly difficult balancing act. You're right about President Carter, obviously. I think President Clinton would still say that his regret at his own Camp David efforts, very late in his term, was one of his great regrets. But I remember the lesson of that, and I think this is, and we talked about this 48 hours ago, I think, is no one got in that zone, in that period, to meeting the incentives of all the parties, right? That it was in their interest to make a deal. And what has happened here is it looks as if the pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu was substantial. And also, it must be enough that Bibi believes that the downside outweighs the upside. And so that becomes part of his incentive. And final point is, I think Joe, you said something really important a minute ago, which was it went against what President Trump did with the apology, went against his base. One of the things you see again and again in American presidential history is that the things for which presidents are positively remembered are those things in which they surprised or challenged their own. Refer you to Richard Nixon in China, Ronald Reagan and the Cold War, Lyndon Johnson and civil rights, and it may just be President Trump and the Middle East here.